On behalf of PIA, a partnership of 8 of the largest environmental centers in Europe, we wish you welcome to this webinar, Is the Climate Smart and Compact City Socially Inclusive? CIENS, the Oslo Center for Interdisciplinary Environmental and Social Research, is a strategic research collaboration between 4 independent research institutes and the Norwegian Meteorological Institute, the University of Oslo, and the Oslo Metropolitan University. The smart and compact city has become the dominant model for urban planning and development. The main political argument for this model is that smart solutions like intelligent transport systems and compact designs will provide ecological benefits. However, it is argued that these spaces predominantly are designed to attract the socioeconomic elite and are becoming less accessible for disadvantaged social groups, thereby contributing to the increasing social spatial inequality observed in many cities. In this peer webinar, which will be recorded, we present research from Norway and Finland on the social implications of smart, green, and compact city developments. My name is Audun Ruud. I am the chairman of the Research Council of CIENS and will moderate this seminar, which will last 1 hour. And we will wrap it up with some questions and comments at the end. Use the Q&A. We have 4 short presentations. The first is made by Per Gunnar Røe, professor at the Department of Sociology and Human Geography, University of Oslo. Please, Per Gunnar, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Audun. Could everybody see the screen now and my presentation? Thank you. So I'm going to talk about investigations and research we've done in Oslo. So I've worked quite a number of years on compact city developments and focusing on both environmental and transport effects, but also increasingly the social implications, and studying also the question if this compact city really is as inclusive as it was supposed to be. I'm just going to give a little background first on the compact city policy, which is dominating urban policies, urban planning policies for the last 30 years or so. The reason for that is a lot of research that was done in the 1980s and 1990s, showing that there is a connection between urban density and transport. So the transport argument was very important for the onset of these policies. And there was one key research done by two Australian researchers, Newman and Kenworthy, showing that there was a connection between urban density, persons per hectare, and annual gasoline use per capita, as you can see in the figure to the left. So shortly, this figure shows that the more dense a city is, the less use of annual use of gasoline per capita in the city. This is quite intuitive as well. If you think about spread out cities with low density, it's hard to have an effective public transport system. The distances between home, workplaces, and services are quite large. As you can see in the example of Atlanta, in the figure to the right, this is a classic comparison between 2 cities that are approximately the same number of inhabitants, between 2.5 and 3 million people in 1990. But which has a very different size when it comes to the built-up area. So Atlanta is a sprawling city covering a large area, while Barcelona is a very, very compact city and has been for a long time. And it's much easier to have a public transport system. On this figure, so you can see the metro system, which in Barcelona covers most of the city, while in Atlanta just covers part of the city. And of course, then in addition comes walking distances and so on. So Atlanta is also a more car-based city. So that's a transport argument for making the city more compact. It's transport reducing. It's more transit and public transport oriented. It's more walkable, and it's also more resilient if there comes a change, for example, increased energy prices, gasoline prices, and so on. It's also been argued that it's a rational choice to make the city more compact because it's more effective, uses infrastructure more effectively, it's more economically viable because you could reduce cost. And some argue that it is more smart and innovative. So the argument is that when you create a denser city, shorter distances, clustering of different types of businesses and industries and activities could be economically beneficial as well. And then there's the last, maybe most problematic and discussed implication of the compact city, namely the social life in cities, urban life, urbanism. So it is argued that compact cities are socially mixed and cohabitated. They're vibrant and creative, and they're livable and attractive. But these things really vary from city to city, and it depends on a lot of other factors than the compactness of the city. And it depends also if you look at compactness as something physical or something social, because some cities may be quite compact physically without having a lot of people of different reasons. So my case, the area I'm going to just give a couple of snapshots from our research today is the waterfront development of the central parts of Oslo. Like many other European cities worldwide, old harbor areas, industrial areas have been transformed to housing, office spaces, recreational spaces, parks and shops and services, restaurants and cafes and so on. And Oslo is no exception. And the whole fjord, the seafront in Oslo, the central parts of Oslo is becoming another type of city with offices and housing and so on. And this was done through a plan called the Fjord City Plan. And what I'm going to focus on when it comes to that plan today is that it really had a goal to create a mixed, diverse city, both with respect to functions, housing, offices, and so on, but also when it comes to the inhabitants and the services, cafes, restaurants, and so on, different price ranges. And also there was a plan that a minimum of 10% of housing in the fjord city should be for disadvantaged groups. It should be rental accommodation for disadvantaged groups. So there was a clear plan to create a diverse city or a new city district that was not only for the elite, as one could expect because of rising housing prices and so on. So the question is, how has this turned out in reality? One challenge in urban planning, and when you make a political ambition and make a plan for the city, is that today's urban planning is done by a number of different actors. It's not only the public agencies for planning, but there are lots of a plethora of different private agencies and actors working within real estate, consultancy, participation, and so on, in addition to all the different sectors within the public authorities. So it's quite difficult to actually know who makes the decision that really creates the city. Another problem is that because of this organization, this governance type of organization, where networking and collaboration across public and private borders are really important, the urban development has become very project-based. So even if you have a large-scale plan, it may be difficult to implement it. So if you look what has happened in Oslo, there's the transformation, the compact city transformation of the central parts of Oslo along the fjord has created a really high-end housing market. So in this area, you would have to pay 172 million kroner, which would be like 20 euro per square meter. No, for 42 square meter of an apartment, and you would have to pay 30,000 per square meter for apartment, which is quite expensive in the Oslo context, almost 10 times as much as you would pay for the cheapest apartment. So this has become a high-end housing market that attracts wealthy people, also empty nesters who could sell their detached house in the outskirts of the city. And no cheap apartments or anything at all has been provided in this area. If you look at also people's income, mean savings, which are important indicators for what kind of people, what kind of socioeconomic status people will have, you will see that the fjord city, which is the column to the right in each of these two figures, have a higher mean income in this area, higher savings than other districts. Also, when you compare to the Outer West, which traditionally has been the richest and the most wealthy part of the city. I'm also going to mention one other aspect of the city, which is quite important for people. So one thing is access to a housing market, of course, where you can live. If you're able to live close to all these amenities that are produced in the central parts of the city. Another thing, if you are able to use the public spaces in the cities. And the city has promoted its new public spaces in various ways, as you can see in these few examples. But we've done some research on the public spaces in the central parts of the city, and increasingly they're programmed and designed towards specific groups. And many of these spaces are also privately owned. So in this picture here, the main spaces in the middle are publicly owned. So they're more or less public spaces, but on each of the sides of this plaza, there are privately owned streets, which are quite regulated with cameras and regulations of what you can do and not do. And there's also new concepts and language where instead of talking about public spaces, one talks now about the city floor. So there's a kind of a conceptual or discursive accommodation of and domestication of the public space. And increasingly, these spaces are also, they attract financial investments in the design of the city, which is increasingly professionalized. So to try to sum up.
You have a minute.
A minute for summing up. Compact urbanism in Oslo, the way we have investigated it in our study, can adversely and inequality impact people's livelihoods, of course. Those living in these compact cities are affected, but also people living in other parts of the city, because it will affect their access to opportunities like public spaces, libraries, and so on, if things are concentrated in the central parts of the city. And especially if the housing markets develops where the most expensive housing are in the central parts of the city with the closest access to all these amenities, and people that are disadvantaged in the housing market or just have a normal income are more or less displaced to the outskirts of the city with long commuting distances and so on. So it's quite clear that these districts, new districts, attract more or less eco-conscious upper and middle class people with certain lifestyles, and that compact city then could lead to what we could call green gentrification, or as Stefan Bosarovsky has called, low carbon gentrification, and may then displace marginalized groups, but also people with kind of middle class income, which maybe initially had lower carbon footprints than the high-end socioeconomic classes, which is really a paradox when you look at the social implications of the compact city model. So I'll end it there and just show you these two papers for those who are interested in looking more into this. To the right, a study we did of the investigation of the design of the barcode, which is a law of compact housing development and office development in Oslo. And to the left, a more literature-based article looking at the compact city model and suggesting a renewed agenda for research and policy making. Thank you.
Great, Per Gunnar. And to you, the Q&A function is open for you in case you have some comments or questions or reflections. But now we proceed with the second presentation. Together with some colleagues at Norwegian Institute for Nature Research, Sander Wente has done some very interesting research on urban environmental justice. Please, Sander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Odin. Yes, I'm stepping in today for my colleague Lena Figari, who was unfortunately sick and couldn't present, but we co-authored this a paper together, which this talk is, I guess, largely based on, but she gets all the credit for this fantastic title, Green, Golden and Compact Environmental Justice in Oslo. So we all know that nature and access to nature, and in this presentation, I use the words green and blue space quite a lot. And those are components of nature, green space being parks, forests, grassy areas, blue space being rivers, fjord, water bodies. But we know through various epidemiological studies and psychological studies that spending time in nature is associated with numerous health benefits. And in this article, this chronic recently published by our research leader here in Oslo, Kristen Torshus-Teien, and some colleagues, we sort of argue for the way that nature, climate, and health go hand in hand. And some countries or some public health services even are starting to attempt to prescribe time in nature as a preventative measure against mental health and physical health disorders, but also as a curative measure. And in the literature on this topic, it's very clear that at least in urban environments, next door nature, or in Norwegian, nær natur, is possibly the most important aspect of nature, and it's the accessibility in urban environments that plays a pivotal role in the exposure that people have to nature and the likelihood with which they will actually spend time in nature. But there's a pattern that's been observed globally. In this paper that I published a few years ago in South Africa, we did a national scale analysis of the distribution of green space over urban geographies in South Africa. And South Africa has quite a unique history with apartheid and the segregation of races spatially. And in this paper, we find that this pattern, the legacy of apartheid is so entrenched in the present geographies, and these little aerial photographs show these extreme differences between very poor, highly dense residential areas and these more affluent sort of villa areas with lots of green space and blue space dispersed amongst them. And this pattern is in no way unique to South Africa. It's prevalent across the developing world, but also in the developed world. And the vast majority of literature that study this show that there are these spatial inequalities in access to blue and green space, with the exception of Singapore and Vienna and some parts of Austria. And this is at least in the literature where it's been studied, but those cities have somehow managed to achieve relative equality of access to nature across income and ethnic geographies. But in Oslo, we wanted to look at this topic, and for slightly different reasons. We know that Oslo is, I think in 2019, was named the European Green City. It has this reputation of being a very sustainable, progressive city. It's obviously located in Norway, which is an egalitarian society, and the governance structures are such that you would expect, if there's anywhere in the world we hope to find equality in access to green space in a green country like Norway, it would be in Oslo. And so we set out to test this, or answer this question with some geospatial, geographical mapping of these of access to or availability of blue and green space. And particularly in Oslo, which, as Per Gunnar just referred to, has had and still has a strong policy for a compact city development for various reasons, which he outlined, one of them being transport. And in these maps here, I show the 4 variables we looked at. And just to give you some spatial reference for those of you who don't know Oslo, this is a satellite image of Oslo, and it sort of maps to the shape. So these maps show sub-districts, which in Norwegian are called delbydel, and these districts are colored by these the gradients of these variables. And on the left is affluence, or average mean annual income, and on the top right is a satellite-derived measure of green space. So for each residence, we calculated the amount of green space within a kilometer buffer, which has been shown in the epidemiological literature to be a good proxy for exposure that people have to green space. On the bottom, we have blue space, which we measured as the proximity to the closest water body. And on the right, population trend, and as a proxy for densification. So yeah. Then if we look at the relation between these, we found that as you increase in income, there's a slight increase in the availability of green space. Not as extreme as you would find in countries like South Africa, but there's still this relationship nevertheless. With blue space, it's a bit more evident, particularly with access to fjord being highly prioritized, as Per Gunnar just showed in his presentation. Wealthier people tend to live closer to the fjord. In fact, I think the statistic was that we worked out was people who live 100 meters from the fjord earn approximately $20,000 per annum more than those who live 500 meters away on average. But then also, if we look at densification, we found the same pattern. So where areas are densifying, they have less availability of green space and blue space, whereas areas that aren't densifying or have low densification pressure have more access to blue and green space. And yeah, this slide is another way of visualizing this. So this map showing 2 variables on the same color palette. So as you go from more gray to pink, you have higher available green space, and as you go up on this y-axis income, you have higher income. So areas that are dark blue, like up here on the northeast west of Oslo, they have relatively high income and high availability of green space, and areas that are gray have relatively low green space and low income. And if we overlay the top 10 delbydel in terms of densification trends, we see that they pretty much co-located with areas that have relative poverty and access to green space. Just to highlight 2 of these as an example, Holmenkollen is delbydel in the northwest of Oslo, and you can see it's sort of a villa environment with big gardens, lots of street trees, whereas Grønland, closer to the city center, has relatively less green space and almost half the annual income compared to Grønland. So in our investigation, these were sort of the take-home messages we were left with after looking at these maps. Yes, there is spatial inequality and access to blue and green space in relation to income or socioeconomic status. And this was somewhat surprising given the context of Oslo. But what was also even more interesting for us, I guess, given the context of Oslo's compact city paradigm, is that these areas overlap with densification patterns. And it leaves us with sort of more discussion point, which we didn't quantify in any way in our paper, but this question of golden ghettos as a driver of green segregation. So just to elaborate on that a bit, you can ask the question, is ghettoization of Oslo a matter of affluence segregation? So I guess generally people would perceive ghettoization as, or a ghetto as a area that is becoming increasingly poor, dilapidated, degraded, with various socioeconomic challenges that are associated with it. And if I overlay this map that I showed earlier, you would assume that this valley on the east side, Groruddalen, is sort of the ghetto, or is ghettoizing in Oslo. But we sort of, if you flip that on its head, we would, we're interested to question whether these golden ghettos, so these areas where affluence is spatially concentrated over time, are in fact maybe give more explanation as to why these patterns in green nature distribution in Oslo are so evident, and they're remarkably resistant to change over time. And part of this is now speculation on my part, and I'm not a sociologist, so take this with a pinch of salt, but from my reading, there's a lot of social capital and cultural resource in these areas, so it's much easier for people to mobilize against, if they want to build apartments in your suburb, your neighborhood, it's much easier to mobilize and lobby against that and stop that. Whereas in the eastern areas, which have a high immigrant population, it's maybe less social capital to prevent such things. And there's also an exclusionary housing market, which makes it difficult for poorer people to move into these areas. And there's also unintentional side effects of municipal policies that may exacerbate this problem. One of them might be the compact city paradigm, and the way that social sustainability might be overlooked in that. And whether that plays out in the future is a question that we have to answer. But one sort of
you wrap it up, Sandeep?
Stop.
Oh, you stop.
Oh, did you say 1 minute?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. Yeah, this is the last slide. So small house plan is, I guess, directly translated small house plan in English is a policy instrument in Oslo where these areas in yellow on this map are earmarked or are areas where there's a restriction on development and restriction on cutting down of old trees and expanding properties. And this is, we argue in this chronic we published in Aftenposten, we argue that without properly thinking through the ramifications for social sustainability, this might exacerbate these spatial inequalities in Oslo. And these graphs here that we generated really illustrate that, where small house plan areas have much more expensive properties, and as a proxy for income, you can infer that they're much wealthier people living there. The population density is much lower than those outside, and also there's much higher green space or tree cover in this case compared to those outside. So by protecting these essentially villa areas, which are actually exclusively residential areas, you're putting development pressure on the matrix or the area around that, and that might lead to disadvantageous outcomes for people living in those areas which are already under densification pressure and have less access to blue and green space. So if you want to refer to some of the details in this methodology, you can check out our publication. And yeah, that was it. Thank you.
Great, and thanks, Sander, for stepping in on very short notice. So as I said, the Q&A function in the bottom of the screen should allow you for questions or reflections that we can come back to by the end of this webinar. But no, CIENS is part of PIA, in which the Finnish Environment Institute, Syke, also is a member. And Joa Peltoma will make a very interesting presentation. So Joa, the floor is yours.
Thank you. If I don't hear any complaints, I assume that the presentation is showing. Greetings from very summery Helsinki. I'm Juha Peltoman, Development Manager in the Finnish Environment Institute. And I'm talking about several projects that we have in Syke regarding the theme of compact and climate smart city and its relation to social sustainability. I've structured it so that we look at 4 kind of different cases, of which we have several projects running, and I have some if not highlights, but some certain topics from each of these domains, which are mobility, planning and green spaces, climate smart living, and then climate adaptation. And from all of these, there's the kind of driving question is how to achieve these in as equal, just, and inclusive manner as possible, and also what to consider when aiming for these. This presentation is comprised with various people in Syke. But first, stuff that we have already perhaps partially heard during the two presentations before this one, but just to sum up, planning is kind of the essential element when we talk about social sustainability in urban environments and how to achieve it. We have different kind of drivers driving it. We have for example, the 15-minute city paradigm or discourse. Then we have urban infill, which come from various kinds of interests. There's economic interests, but obviously also climate and other sustainability kind of targets. Then we have the smart mobility discussions, which also clearly affect these issues. And I think more recently, the no net land take or no net loss discussions regarding biodiversity in urban environments. And another way to look at it is how could we achieve win-wins rather than trade-offs between these different goals that we have. We have the residents, obviously the quality of living, recreation, health, and those kinds of issues. Also the issue whether people want to live in these compact and climate smart cities. Then we have the urban infill issues, as I already mentioned, and then the green spaces, and all these should be kind of brought together in a way that is just and equal, but would also benefit from each other. And that is obviously not an easy task. Eco-gentrification is another concept that I want to bring here, but I think it's the same that we've been already discussing here on the previous presentations as well. But to go into the 4 domains, we start with the mobility, and one large project with one kind of sub theme was to see how urban environments and social demographics associate with the spatial and social distribution of household car ownership and carlessness, especially. We have looked at few areas in Finland, and coming from the starting point that carlessness is increasing, but when we look at it from the socio-demographic and spatial viewpoints or glasses, we see that it's in the more affluent households, which are often in the more dense and well-connected areas, carlessness is a choice. But on the other hand, in other kind of urban fabrics, it's a constraint, it's a non-choice, it's an obligation. And what to do with this is that in transport planning and urban planning, especially, carlessness is perhaps not something that has been recognized as well as it should have. So focus on there. I at this point already apologize for the swift process of this presentation, because there's quite a lot of stuff in here. If we move to the planning and green spaces, our second domain here, we look at in this case, we look at what are the impacts of socioeconomic status, of the quality and accessibility of urban green spaces. So it's also related to the previous carlessness and mobility. And when we look at the results here, they are perhaps slightly more positive than on the mobility side. We see that 90% of Finns live somewhere where there is a 300-meter or less distance to green area that is at least 1.5 hectares. Accessibility to larger green areas is not that good. But what is interesting perhaps here is that the wealthy areas have better access to large green areas, but the disadvantaged areas have better accessibility to areas with services and routes. And in this research, kind of the special point was that it was also researched through the quality of these green spaces, not just the space as such. So whether there are services, how accessible it is, and so on. So as I said, that the development is positive, but it's also in the larger metropolitan areas, Helsinki especially, development is diverging. And one reason for this kind of positive status is the history. We have the forest suburbs from the 60s that were criticized and perhaps also are still criticized on kind of low, perhaps mobility, accessibility, but on the other hand, there's still the green areas quite accessible here in these areas. You can get the slides from me and also the references and all that if you're interested. So please be in touch. The third domain that we've been investigating is climate smart living, building planning, but especially building and retrofitting climate and energy solutions in these buildings. And the question or the objective here was that how climate smart living can be improved in a just and inclusive manner, especially in suburbs. And the notions here were that the climate policies in urban contexts are by default not designed for suburban contexts or stemming from suburban kind of issues. And here also the vulnerable social groups are the ones that are especially disconnected from these policies, often living in these suburban contexts. And what kind of the take-home message or what to do with this is that we need more kind of clear incentives that utilize also knowledge that is more easily approached and also accessed. Also utilizing certain kind of intermediators, neighborhood organizations or facilitators in trying to advance these endeavors in suburbs, especially the retrofitting of, for example, energy efficiency measures in older buildings. And was also interesting notion was that kind of the role of public steering. It was something that was called for. So we talk about governance and all these bottom-up approaches and inclusion, but it's also quite important that we have quite strong public steering in addressing these issues. The final one is climate adaptation. Here we've looked at the objective of social exclusion and justice in urban climate adaptation, and especially in flood risk management. And here is perhaps also something that relates to some areas of planning, that they are quite technically oriented still. Flood risk management or water management, especially, at least in Finland. And this results in a situation where there's, from the planning side, there is no kind of knowledge, or it's quite weak on the vulnerabilities and inequalities. And also the idea that increasing inclusion means that the policies become weaker. But also from the kind of the citizen or the grassroots side, there's not much knowledge on these issues, and also not knowledge how to get involved in these, even though they quite often are quite directly related to the environments that people live in. So the outcome or the take-home message here is that we need more sensitivity in recognizing these structural inequalities, and also to understand the differences of these different groups, not just to understand who they are, but what does it actually mean in their daily daily practices. So maybe
You
time
wrap
to
it all
bring-
now with a small minute.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to do. In the beginning, we have the two questions of how to achieve this social and just urban city or compact city, and what should be considered. As already mentioned several times, it's planning that has the ability to do this. And in Finland, it has been successful in some cases, but obviously there's also still a lot to do, especially combining these different targets. Also, one interesting thing that has been popping up is data as an intermediating factor, how open it is, who does it represent, who is involved in producing the data. And then when we look at what should be considered, we have looked at kind of three kinds of justice. There's distributive justice, how do we divide resources, who do we recognize, and then the processes that should be as transparent as possible. And in all of the cases that we presented here, some of these aspects are going well, but perhaps on some of these aspects of justice, there is room to improve. I think my time is coming to an end, so I will stop here and wait for the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you, because the Q&A is available for those having something to express. But now we continue with the final presentation, and that's going to be given by Hege Hofstad, researcher at Norwegian Institute for Urban and Regional Research at the Oslo Metropolitan University, which is also a member of CIENS. So Hege, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I hope you all managed one final presentation. Let me just, okay, just tell me if something doesn't work, but I see that Audun is nodding, so I think it's okay. I think my presentation fit well with the last one actually, because I will delve a little bit more intimately into a lot of questions he raised. So I hope this will fit together well. So I will talk about socially just urban development and the conditions for making climate transformation socially just. And I will look into arguments and experiences of protest movements, professions, and politicians as very important actors, all of them. So a key dilemma, which has been more and more apparent, is, of course, to make climate transformation efficiently, effective, that you have rapid progress, but at the same time not leaving anyone behind. So that is, a core dilemma. And I'm interested in what kind of values, what kind of interests, concerns, dilemmas are activated when you roll out the climate transformative policies in the wake of making them effective and socially just. So I hope to capture and characterize different experiences, arguments, and interests. And an inspiration, I think, is Valens and colleagues, which said a number of years ago, actually a decade ago, that we have to be aware that many eco-friendly proposals and programs actually disrupt preferred or established patterns of behavior, values, and traditions that people would like to see preserved, such as private automobility and suburban living. So she says it's kind of utopian. So we have to, be aware of that. Okay, so the active landscape that I will present for you is the main, the contradiction or conflict that we look into is on the one side reactive actions to stop climate measures and proactive actions for more ambitious climate policies. And we look at, on the reactive side, locally oriented political parties and place-based protest actions. And we look at this in Sweden and Norway, in Oslo, Bergen, Stockholm, and Gothenburg. And we look at it in densification policies and also in mobility policies when they are implemented. So one thing that we need to be aware of is that, okay, although we are engaging reactively, you may still support climate transformation on a broader scale. So that's important. On the other side, on a proactive side, we look at globally oriented environmental organizations. You could call them traditional environmental organizations, but also place-based sustainability initiatives, which is smaller and maybe also for a shorter time period. And we also look at, administration and politicians locally on a district level and centrally in the cities in position and opposition. So that is our data. So we started out from a thought of interactive governance as being an important ingredient when you do climate transformation, because you need to engage a lot of different actors in order to succeed. So that was kind of our starting point. But what we actually find is that when we look at concrete implementation of policies, we find actually that formal channels for political influence is more important than more co-creational or collaborative governance kind of channels. I think the cities, they use these more explorative arenas when they need to develop new policies. But this is, the daily processes of daily work of climate transformation in a way. And we find that they use the political party channel from city district to city council a lot. They use also, the citizens are really very closely in touch with the city district board. And then they use that as a springboard in a way to get in contact with city council through deputation, citizen initiatives, etc. But we also find, I think, much due to a democratic void in a way on the transport arena, we also find in two of the cities, new parties have been founded around transport policies. Reactive ones, in opposition to tolling tolls, for example. So that's interesting. But what we also find is that place-based proactive movements, they function as partners. They say, for example, we always have a proposal for a solution. We don't just come with a problem. So they are more, involved in co-creation in a way. And another one says, we will show the municipality that we fulfill their ambitions in the green strategy and show through the way we are and work that they can use us as pilots. So they are in a way leading the way towards new policies in a very interesting way, I think. So which notions of justice and which conflicts and tensions is active at the climate field when you roll out policies? We find that there is a clear generational conflict, which is, from the sustainability side, it's really well known. But what we find is that the politicians and the administration is very much aware of this conflict on generational and distributional. And one politician says, whom should we listen to, future generations or those living now? Often we select the here and now. So they are very much aware that we are not looking too long into the future. We are not able to do that, actually. And some of the proactive movements said that you don't hear the line of students not having a place to live. So you should densificate because you need to bring the young people into the housing market. That is one position. While the reactive actor says elderly people is not heard. We have to be here and now. The distributional conflict is also active among administration and politicians, maybe mostly on administration. This is from Oslo. It says, in the vision, climate measures shall create a better city with less social differences. So they try to combine, climate transformation and social distribution. But then some of the reactive movement says that the climate policy is for the resourceful with strong health. It is a policy designed for them. While the other side says that it's the rich people driving the most. Poor people use public transport. So, the poor people, they gain from the climate policy in a way. And we also find a geographical conflict, and I think all the presenters before me have illustrated very, very well that it's the ability to engage geographically is divided. But what we also find is that when it's different notions and values concerning climate transformations, solutions in practice, when you implement it, and it's particularly evident when climate policies hit local communities and their practices. And then, the contextual conditions comes into play. So people can be very much pro climate policies, but when it hits their environment, it becomes so much more complex and challenging. And we also find a quite harsh, value conflict at the mobility fields. Which concerns should actually guide climate transformation? One politician says that we must dare to challenge, the holy car. While at the other hand, a representative from a new, mobility inspired party says, having a car is the right to free mobility. We should not curb that opportunity. And we also find that the transport sector is really interesting because the democratic opportunities from the local level and up to the national level is very limited. And also that the field is very complex. Strong experts have all power, and one of them says the meticulous governing by the state, undemocratic, long processes, thematically hard to understand, also for professional people. And it's a clear tension between central, national concerns and local urban concerns. So it's no sensitivity for urban values. They use their usual norms regarding roads, etc., all over. And what we also find is...
Are you going in for landing, Hege?
Yeah. What we find is that it is a mismatch between protesters and governors. The reactive movements, they feel unrecognized, not heard, often ignored. So this is procedural justice. They are not convinced by the arguments used, and they are producing alternative knowledge assessments. That's when the policies hit them. Governors, on the other side, feel that the protest is not often in sync with political processes, and the protesters are not willing to take responsibility for climate transformation. So it is a battle of values, and the legitimacy question, I think, is the Achilles heel of climate transformation. So it is very important to strengthen the legitimacy of political processes, to provide access to the knowledge foundation of proposed projects, to secure transparency concerning the professional judgments and the weighing of concerns, and to be open and predictable concerning processual steps and decisions, because many protesters do not experience the processes as such. So, so the challenge, I think, is to move beyond the congregation of actors, the traditional congregation of actors, and to, as one politician says, protests make solutions better, and also to give opportunities to have a seat at the table also at the earlier stages of a policy, but also to look critically at the ground anticipations, which is part of the climate policy in a way? Are we clinging to dogmas that are not really well founded? So that will be my end. Thank you.
Great, Tage. Thank you very much. I understood you had some busy schedule today, but you managed to participate. I can't see actually that there are any questions or comments in the Q&A. Then actually we have a few minutes left, and I would like to ask Joar, which is the foreigner. Yeah, do you have any comments before I will ask Per Gunnar to wrap it all up before I make the final saying? Joar, do you have anything to add or reflect or relate to what has been spoken and said so far?
Not really, except that it's interesting to see that we well, not surprising, but still interesting to see that we revolve around the same topics that are really quite complex, and how to see the forest from the woods is perhaps one notion here. That how do we kind of combine all these together, and who to whom it's the decision makers, it's the citizens, it's us as researchers. What should we research? So just thinking out loud, really, but really interesting presentations, and I think they also complement each other quite nicely.
Great, and thanks for contributing. Per Gunnar?
Yeah, so I just want to say thank you for everyone who contributed to this event and for excellent presentations. So one of my, we have very little time now, but one of the things that I would like to add at the end here is the need for interdisciplinarity, because I think these presentations coming from different angles, from different theory traditions, working on the same type of issues, some social complications related to the compact city, reveals that there is a need to collaborate across the fields of geography, political science, nature studies, and so on. It's quite evident, but it's often difficult because we work often with colleagues within the same discipline. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to add is that, and I worked a bit on this myself, if there are some specific context when it comes to policy traditions, history, but also landscape and how cities are formed, that should be of importance when you discuss it in the European context. So are there some peculiarities of the Nordic cities compared to European cities? What are the differences between different European countries? Because often we discuss these findings as if they could be transferred or could be replicated other places, but there are big differences between cities because of different histories, economic base, population and landscape, but also political traditions and the role of the welfare state, of course, which may be putting them in a special position. So thank you again.
No, I'm thanking you. And we got one comment in the Q&A, and that one is just reading no questions, but thank you for all the interesting talks. So I thank you. Is the climate smart and compact city social inclusive? The answer is yes and no. What we know is that CIENS and Per in different ways and with different approaches will follow up. And I thank you very much for participating. It's recorded. So you are, in case someone would like to revisit your slides, they can just go back to the recorded, which will be published at the Per homepage and hopefully also at the CIENS homepage. So then I just say the 3 o'clock is here, and thank you very much for showing up. So bye-bye.